Welcome to the Diabolical Chronicles Unearthed. Get ready to explore our latest revelations. Immerse yourself in the captivating journey and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling content.
During excavations at Taposiris Magna, an ancient city in northern Egypt, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez and her team discovered a huge complex of tunnels more than 4,200 feet long. Actually, they found a huge religious center with 3 sanctuaries, more than 1,500 artifacts, busts, statues, gold coins. But the most interesting discovery was a complex of tunnels leading to sunken structures. Numerous earthquakes that have occurred in the region over the centuries may have caused the tunnels to collapse. The archaeologist believes that she's finally discovered the lost tomb of Cleopatra. If that's the case, the find will be the most important discovery of the 21st century. Today you'll learn why the mummies were screaming, how the rulers of ancient Egypt entertained themselves, when mankind invented chemical weapons, where hobbits actually lived, and who they hunted. Cleopatra, the last queen of ancient Egypt with real power, ruled from 51 BC to 30 BC, and she's still a very mysterious figure. From what we know, she was an outstanding woman of unparalleled wealth and power. Cleopatra became queen at the age of 18, spoke 9 languages, studied politics, economics, and mathematics. All in all, she was an intelligent and outstanding politician, one of the first, if not the first, influential woman in history. And of course, when talking about Cleopatra, one just has to mention her beauty. But here's the thing. Most of the information about the queen came from the Romans, who considered her a rival. Imagine your jealous colleague or your nasty neighbor are asked to describe you. How true would it be? The same goes for Cleopatra. However, the Romans never found the queen herself and her tomb. According to the legend, Cleopatra tried to outsmart everyone by hiding her eternal resting place so that it would never be found. And judging by the fact that her tomb has not yet been discovered, she did a great job. Very soon, however, the discovery at Taposiris Magna may change it. If tunnels do lead to a tomb, it may well belong to Cleopatra and her husband, Mark Antony. According to Plutarch, when Augustus and his Roman armies invaded Egypt and captured Alexandria, Mark Antony fell on his sword and died in Cleopatra's arms, after which he was buried in the mausoleum. 2 weeks later, Queen Cleopatra followed him there to make offerings and then allowed herself to be bitten by a venomous snake. Tragic love story and all that. So far, no other tombs of the rulers from the Ptolemaic dynasty, that is, those who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great, have been found. All the tombs were reportedly located in the palace quarter of Alexandria and appear to be underwater, as is the rest of the area. The sea simply swallowed the land here. If the burial site of Cleopatra and Antony is discovered, it'll give archaeologists decades worth of work. We will at least learn more about what Cleopatra looked like and how she died, and at best we'll be able to learn much more about her life, and in general about Egyptian customs of the time. The most recent information about alleged Cleopatra's tomb was made public in November 2022, so it's still unclear what scientists have found in the first place. And yes, we know so little about Cleopatra that we have no idea what exactly she looked like. I mean, sure, the queen is constantly portrayed as a beautiful seductress with men willing to part with their lives just to spend one night with her, but archaeological evidence suggests that this image may not be entirely accurate. The latest existing source is a tiny silver coin about 2,000 years old. It portrays the Egyptian queen with a shallow forehead, pointed nose, narrow lips, and a not-so-pretty chin. Yes, over 2,000 years, the standards of beauty have changed dramatically, but even by ancient standards, Cleopatra wasn't beautiful. The widespread image of Cleopatra is that of a beautiful ruler adored by Roman politicians and generals. However, it seems that the image of Cleopatra as a beautiful seductress was largely fabricated in a later period. Roman writers tell us that Cleopatra was intelligent and charismatic, and that she had a seductive voice. That's it. Not a word about her beauty. At all. Historians have nothing resembling a portrait to make assumptions about Cleopatra's looks. The best leads we got are coins, Egyptian reliefs, most likely unrealistic and created for the eyes of her subjects, and marble busts. Not very reliable sources, to put it bluntly. Modern scholars rightly doubt that Cleopatra could rule the country and make alliances through her beauty alone. The queen was quite intelligent and educated. In addition, she was damn good at manipulation. Historians didn't like the idea of a woman who could outsmart her male contemporaries, so they attributed her success to her looks. Still, Cleopatra did take care of herself. One of the beauty routines often attributed to Cleopatra was bathing in donkey's milk. It's believed to have made her skin softer, whiter, and to have erased facial wrinkles. Today, the benefits of this procedure seem questionable. But hey, ancient Egyptians weren't very good at cosmetology. Scientists also believe that they were able to recreate the perfume that Cleopatra used. This was made possible by a very clever X-ray fluorescence technology. It allowed scientists to analyze molecules found in the jars of perfume used by the queen. After numerous experiments, they were able to get a pleasant fragrance with base notes of myrrh and cinnamon, as well as other accompanying ingredients. While it's not a 100% accurate scent Cleopatra used, it's close enough. One could sniff the perfume at the National Geographic Museum in 2019, and it's called Eau de Cleopatra. There aren't many ancient rulers one could smell. It's worth saying that bathing in donkey's milk is not the oddest whim of Egyptian rulers. Pharaoh Pepi II reigned from about 2300 to 2206 BC, and he ascended the throne at about the age of 6. Naturally, his mother largely ruled instead of him, but Pepi was still a young kid who had a huge kingdom at his disposal. As you can imagine, this leaves a certain mark, and Pepi seemed to be spoiled as hell. Shortly after he became pharaoh, an explorer named Harkuf wrote a letter to Pepi informing him that he had seen a dancing pygmy. After hearing this, the pharaoh reacted as any child would. He was delighted. He wrote a letter that historians call one of the most human that has survived to our days. This is what Pepi wrote. He was about 8 years old at the time. "Hurry and bring with you this pygmy, live, hale, and healthy, for the dances of the god, to gladden the heart, to delight the heart. When he goes down with you into the ship, get worthy men to be around him on deck. Don't let him fall in the water. When he lies down at night, get worthy men to lie around him in his tent. Inspect 10 times at night." There's also information that grown-up Pepi hated flies so much that he even smeared his slaves with honey so that they would distract the insects and keep them away from the pharaoh. However, despite these accounts, Pepi II ruled for 64 years. According to some reports, 94 years, but it seems to be a common ancient Egyptian exaggeration. At that time, they liked to write that the pharaohs reigned the country for 100 years or more. How else could it be when pharaohs were like gods? We seem to be too focused on pharaohs, but they were not the only ones who were mummified. It was basically the standard method of burial in ancient Egypt, but sometimes scientists find something really weird and frightening, like screaming mummies. From time to time, archaeologists discover mummies that seem to have actually been screaming at the moment of death. That might have been caused by scary rituals or even a heart attack, with their heads tilted backwards, their mouths wide open, and their empty eyes staring into the void. These are some of the creepiest mummies people ever found. Take, for example, this screaming woman who died about 3,000 years ago. The first analysis claimed that the shocking pose was related to the woman's cause of death, a heart attack. The woman was thought to have died alone and was not discovered until hours later. When rigor mortis set in, the jaw, which had opened at the moment of death, was frozen in a spooky position forever as the contracted muscles become rigid and cannot relax until the body begins to decompose. And since the woman was already mummified, she avoided decomposition and became a nightmarish archaeological find. However, other scientists are skeptical about that and claim that her mouth probably opened after she died. They even have an argument. Rigor mortis sets in 2 to 3 days after death, and the mummification process can last more than 70 days. Within that time, the jaw could already have been brought back to a normal position, even if the person died of a heart attack. So what caused this post-mortem scream then? It's believed that the wrappings of many mummies were not tight enough around the jaw. The mouth tends to open even when wrappings are as tight as possible. This position of the mouth is actually quite common in mummies. Another reason for this phenomenon is the shrinking of soft tissue as it dries out, which leaves extra room for the jaw to open and create a screaming effect. But there is another likely reason why a mummy's mouth might be open. In 2006, a 16th century woman was unearthed among the medieval victims of the plague in Venice, Italy. During excavations, it was discovered that her jaw had been forced open with a brick. That is, the person had died and then a rock had been put in the mouth of the corpse. No, this was not a mockery of the dead, just a result of the belief in vampires. In the Middle Ages, people were basically inclined to believe in various horrors occurring after death, mostly because the process of decomposition was not well studied. For example, when the human stomach decomposes, it releases a dark purge fluid. This blood-like liquid can flow freely from the nose and mouth of a corpse. Since tombs and mass burials were often reopened during plagues to add new bodies, Italian gravediggers saw these decomposing remains. And if a corpse had something resembling blood coming out of its mouth, it was definitely a vampire. Also, the liquid would sometimes moisten the burial shroud near the corpse's mouth so that the cloth would sag into the jaw. This could cause the fabric to tear, and it appeared as if the corpse was chewing on its shroud. Some believe the vampires spread the plague this way. They chewed the shroud, thus infecting people. Don't ask me how it works. Better get a witcher now. Well, while the witcher's on his way, you can put a brick in the vampire's mouth. This was thought to stop the spread of the disease. Speaking of witchers, let's take a look at Poland. Oh, Poland has a long history of fighting vampires, as evidenced by several vampire burials. These burials are easy to recognize. The dead were buried with sickles around their necks or rocks in their jaws, just like in Egypt. The idea is quite simple. If the vampire tries to get up, the sickle will cut off his head. Well, the rock will prevent the undead from feeding on innocent people. Apparently, vampires lost the ability to use their hands. According to ancient lore, a person was at risk of becoming a vampire after death if he was not baptized, died a violent death, died first in an epidemic, or died far from his native settlement. I don't know if the vampire qualities were enhanced if several factors worked together. The people in the vampire burials in Poland were locals, and apparently they were victims of the cholera epidemic. I guess people couldn't determine who died first after all and decided one can't be too cautious. I don't think you'd be surprised by the fact that vampires are just a figment of our superstitious ancestors' imagination, but what about hobbits, who actually existed? They didn't have big hairy feet, and the real hobbits didn't live in the Shire, but on the Indonesian island of Flores. Anyway, let's take it one step at a time. At the beginning of this millennium, the majority of paleoanthropologists believed that only modern humans, our species, Homo sapiens, were able to travel beyond the continent. It seemed unlikely that ancient humans had vessels capable of crossing the ocean. That all changed in 2003 when the remains of an ancient ancestor of a very, very small size were discovered on the island of Flores. Its tiny brain and strange primitive features sparked a debate about its place in the human genealogical tree. Of course, the researchers initially thought they'd found an ancient man with microcephaly, a disease characterized by a small head and short stature. But later finds of skeletons of the same size proved that the hobbit was not an individual tiny person, but a member of an entire species. Homo floresiensis was one of the last extinct human species. This distant relative of ours went extinct about 50,000 years ago, shortly before or during the time Homo sapiens appeared in the region. These hobbits were really short, about 3 feet tall, weighing about 55 pounds with a brain size of about 23 cubic inches. That is about 3 times less than ours. The skeleton of the hobbit could be easily mistaken for the skeleton of a child, and only fully developed wisdom teeth proved to scientists that this was actually an adult. True, the skeletal structure was also quite specific: broad hip bones, short collarbones, noticeable flat feet, and an unusual location of the shoulder joint. The hobbits had to bend their knees much when walking, so they moved slowly. So slowly, in fact, that they never could keep up with the evolution. Why did these ancient people never evolve? As usual, there are several theories. Initially, it was assumed that the population of Homo erectus arrived on Flores from Java, perhaps by boat, and then they simply shrank in size. Not at once, of course, but over hundreds of thousands of years. This is how island dwarfism works. Large animals isolated on islands get smaller because they have limited resources and no large predators to protect themselves from. In short, it's just useful for them. The second theory points to microcephaly, which I mentioned earlier. However, Homo sapiens have no known diseases or conditions that match what scientists have found in hobbits, so it doesn't sound convincing. But it wasn't just the ancient humans that got smaller on the island of Flores. Researchers have found thousands of stone tools associated with thousands of elephant bones, in particular, the bones of Stegodon, the ancestor of modern elephants. Actually, Stegodon was the largest of the Proboscidea order, almost 13 feet tall and weighing 12 tons. But this is outside the island of Flores. Once in an isolated space, the Stegodon shrank to the size of buffalo, so scientists have suggested that many humans may have hunted many elephants. After all, no ancient man would have ignored such a source of meat and fat if it was within a walking distance. There's even evidence of hobbits seemingly using fire. So how about an elephant barbecue? Too bad this all happened so long ago that nothing can be proved with 100% certainty. Anyway, until the researchers found some solid evidence, but don't worry, such finds sometimes happen very unexpectedly. Only in 2011 did the scientific community discover that one of the first chemical attacks in human history happened long before World War I. Around 256 AD, the Roman fort of Dura Europus fell victim to a Persian siege in what is now Syria. When archaeologists investigated the site, they found not only a pile of bodies of Roman soldiers killed in battle, but also traces of yellow sulfur crystals and pitch. All of this indicated that the Romans had been killed by the toxic gas. It's believed that this was probably one of the earliest known chemical attacks in history. It happened nearly 1,700 years ago. The dead Roman soldiers were part of the city's garrison and were digging a tunnel to attack the besieging Persians. The Persians, in turn, were digging their own tunnels to undermine the city walls. Apparently, the Persians waited until the defenders of the city got closer and then pumped toxic gas into their tunnel, killing the soldiers in a matter of minutes. The victims choked, passed out, and then died, and the Persians made a wall out of their bodies. Eventually, the city was captured. Now, oh wait, Steve's got something for me. Okay, I gotta say a few words about that. You probably remember the Notre Dame fire that happened in 2019. The fire did huge damage and the cathedral is still being reconstructed. But in the process of repair, the construction team accidentally stumbled upon something unexpected: an ancient graveyard and two human-shaped sarcophagi made of lead. All this time, the graveyard was under a layer of church floor dating back to the 18th century, and no one realized it existed. Researchers believe that the graveyard itself dates back to the 14th century. One lead sarcophagus had buckled under the weight of the church above, but was still sealed when it was discovered. Everything seemed to hint that one should not open the sarcophagus. Using a tiny endoscopic camera, the researchers were able to look inside one of these sarcophagi and examine its contents without any damage. The researchers found a mummified body that presumably belonged to a young man of a high status, such as an important dignitary buried in the 14th century. The second sarcophagus contained the remains of a priest who died in 1710. It's not clear why there's a time gap and difference in the status of these men, but both of them were important in their time because they were buried in prestigious coffins in the heart of the cathedral. While most of the treasures were found barely 8 inches below the cathedral floor, the sarcophagi were buried 3 feet deep. This, in fact, is what allowed them to remain undiscovered for so long. Actually, when the restoration of Notre Dame began, everyone was worried whether it would be possible to recreate the cathedral in all its splendor. After all, there were a lot of beautiful Gothic details, stained glass and everything like that. But mankind was really lucky because they had Andrew Tallon. This Belgian art historian used laser-mounted tripods to create a point cloud of information on every surface of a building's interior. He accurately scanned every feature of this complex structure, including those that defied any explanation at all. Just 1 billion points of data, and you have the most accurate copy of the building. This peculiar scan attracted the attention of the scientific community back in 2015, and in 2018 the art historian sadly passed away. He had no idea that his work would soon become the basis for the reconstruction of Notre Dame, a cathedral the art historian had admired all his life. Seems like our video could use something mystical. How about this? Atlantis and Noah's Ark. By now, they've supposedly been found so many times that I'm starting to think that some parts of the planet are covered by an even layer of Atlantis and arks. The mythical island of Atlantis was first described by the ancient Greek historian Plato in 360 BC. And since then, it stirred the imagination of those who love mysterious, enigmatic, and unexplained things. According to Plato, Atlantis was a great naval power that sank into the sea more than 10,000 years ago as a result of a catastrophe. Naturally, everybody wanted to find an artifact the size of an entire country, so Atlantis has been found in many places around the world. One researcher is almost certain that it's Bolivia. Another says it's Antarctica. A third one claims that Bimini Road, a rock formation in the Bahamas, may be a fragment of a lost civilization. Atlantis has even been found in Cuba and Japan. Although archaeologists strongly doubt that Atlantis actually existed, some continue to argue about which of the ruins found could be considered remnants of that ancient civilization. However, even without definitive proof, Atlantis continues to be a matter of interest. Huge interest. It's the same story with Noah's Ark. This ark, in which, according to legend, Noah, his family, and a bunch of animals escaped the flood, has been found many times. For thousands of years, amateur archaeologists have persistently been searching for evidence of this legendary ark on and around Mount Ararat in Turkey. There were no more specific instructions in the original text. Of course, from the scientific point of view, the existence of the ark is quite a controversial topic. With all the animals on the ark and the food and water to feed them, there simply would not have been enough room for everyone. The primary source mentions the dimensions of the ark, and it's somewhere around 1,115 feet by 197 feet and 111 feet in height. A vessel like that could hardly be built even today, and back in those times it would have taken hundreds of months to build it. No matter what construction period is proposed by people who believe the ark is real, and I've come across figures like 30 or even 100 years, it still sounds unrealistic. By the way, where would one get so much wood? Nevertheless, despite the controversy, they keep finding Noah's Ark again and again. In February 1993, a piece of wood, supposedly part of the Ark, was even shown on television. Of course, this made a huge impression, though it later turned out that the researcher was a paid actor who never had even been to Turkey. And the piece of wood itself was nothing more than an ordinary pine soaked in soy sauce for color and artificially aged in an oven. Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing when your ancient artifact is created with soy sauce. The TV channel made excuses afterwards, saying the show was entertainment, not a documentary. Later in 2006, the Ark was found again, then dug out for a while, then examined, but the scientific community didn't accept the results. Professional scientists were not involved in the study, so this discovery also turned out to be somewhat inconclusive. I would even call Noah's Ark a sort of Atlantis, only it's a ship. But is Atlantis impossible to find? We have quite a lot of tech now. We can look at the ocean from space and everything like that. Why hasn't there been a brilliant discovery so far? After all, it's a whole city. Well, the main reason is that Atlantis is first and foremost a myth, a cautionary tale made up by one of the brightest minds of ancient Greece, the Athenian philosopher Plato. He left us the only written account of Atlantis, and if you suddenly decide to read it, a translated version of course, you'll probably find that it's a bunch of metaphors and allegories and stuff like that. Every reference to this legendary place sounds like a mixture of fantasy and science fiction. Atlantis was a huge island, larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was populated by a race of demigods led by powerful kings who descended from Poseidon. Okay, that wasn't that rare in ancient Greece. The Atlanteans created an advanced civilization and built huge cities at a time when the rest of the world was still in the Neolithic. Sounds very cool. But all this fantasy was only meant to glorify Athenian democracy. It was super new back then, and the Athenians were terribly proud of themselves. Besides, the story of Atlantis is a warning. In its lust for power, this advanced civilization declared war on all the peoples of the Mediterranean and captured all of them but the people of Athens. They managed to defeat the Atlanteans, and then the wrath of the gods fell upon the great race and the island sank. Overall, Plato wanted to tell his contemporaries, stay humble, virtuous, and don't put wealth above all else, or something like that. Even Aristotle, Plato's pupil, basically dismissed the legend of Atlantis, considering it pure fantasy. After all, the details contained in his two works were too incredible to be true. Anyway, Plato wrote that Atlantis, let me remind you, that's a gigantic island, almost like an entire continent, was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That is, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. So where is it then? I can't see it either. Actually, it seems to me that if it were not for pseudoscientists and conspiracy theorists, Atlantis would have remained simply a fragment of Plato's work, a rather small one at that, and nobody would have paid attention to it. On the other hand, Atlantis is now an element of our culture that can be found in books, movies, shows, documentaries, and video games. Even Tolkien used the myth of Atlantis in his Legendarium. And that's saying something. See you later.